Hello, good evening, welcome everyone. So I think we should get started, even though I know a lot of the 700s are probably at home packing, getting ready for the various trips for the 700 Option Studios. But thank you for coming tonight. And I want to start with this land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the University of Pennsylvania is situated upon the ancestral homeland and territory of the Lenni Lenape peoples. As members of an educational community, we are obligated to know the stories of dispossession that have allowed the University of Pennsylvania to grow and thrive on this vibrant terrain. As designers and thinkers, we endeavor to build in ways that lead toward justice, and we are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing consequences of settler colonialism. Today's topic is actually a little somewhat connected to something like a land acknowledgement. So our title is Displacement and Architecture of Transition. We are so honored to welcome Marina Tabassum, founder of Marina Tabassum Architects in Dhaka, Bangladesh, very, very far away from Philadelphia. Her work brings a vital and diverse perspective to architectural discourse, challenging us to rethink the role of architecture as a catalyst for social change. In tonight's title, Displacement and Architecture of Transition, Marina Tabassum addresses one of the most urgent and complex challenges of our time, mass displacement. The 21st century has witnessed unprecedented forced migration due to war, conflict, and climate-induced disasters. Millions find themselves in indefinite states of transition, enduring profound physical, mental, and emotional trauma, deprived of basic rights and dignity. Tabassum poses critical questions. Can architecture serve as a medium of healing? How can architectural interventions restore dignity and agency to people in transition? Marina's practice exemplifies a profound commitment to placemaking that is both contextually grounded and globally resonant. The acclaimed Bait Ur Rouf, I probably totally bastardized that, Mosque in Dhaka, recipient of the 2016 Aga Khan Award for Architecture, stands as a testament to her approach. Departing from conventional mosque architecture, the design emphasizes spatial purity and the orchestration of natural light, creating a serene environment that serves not only as a place of worship, but also as a communal refuge within a densely populated urban area. In 2021, she was awarded the Somme Medal, recognizing her architecture of relevance that responds to the pressing concerns of our time. The jury commended her ability to translate the lessons of vernacular architecture into a contemporary language, highlighting her commitment to creating spaces that are both meaningful and sustainable. I'm sure you will see a lot of that in her examples today. Her recent inclusion in Time's 100 Most Influential People of 2023 underscores her global impact and the growing recognition of her contributions to the field. I first met Marina when I visited Bangladesh for the first time many, many years ago. We visited many projects by contemporary local architects and of course by Lu Khan. And as we talked about Lu Khan's influence, she shared a very touching story with me. She shared how profoundly she and her generation were influenced by Louis Kahn's work on the National Assembly building in Dhaka. Without the opportunity of traveling widely as students, you know, they didn't have 700 studios like we do today, traveling all over the world just for a design studio. Students of her time, they experienced the Western world through Kahn's modernist ideals embedded in their own landscape. This inversion is poignant today. Tonight, she's speaking at the very school where Kant studied and taught, and I actually didn't know we're holding the lecture right here in Kant's old studio. So her journey reflects a full circle, where the influence once received is now generously given back, enriching our understanding of architecture through her unique lens. She compels us to rethink conventions and to embrace an architecture that is responsive, responsible, and rooted in a deep understanding of place and people. Please join me in welcoming Marina Tabassum.
Thank you, Rosanna. Thanks for this invitation. It's wonderful to be here. My first time at UPenn. Yeah, so it's kind of daunting to be standing here, really, in Khan's studio. And I don't know if his ghost is somewhere around watching. Yeah, but yeah, so here I am. So as Rosanna mentioned, I come from Bangladesh. And my practice, I was born, brought up, and my practice is based in Dhaka and Bangladesh. That's where I studied. That's, so that's what I am in a way. So in a way, I generally like to start my talks about talking about where I come from, where it all starts and everything. So Bangladesh, as you can see, that red dot in the global map, it's a country that's surrounded by India on 3 sides, and then we have Bay of Bengal. And then this here shows all the different, the water system that actually created our land, which is Bangladesh. So it's in the foothills of the Himalayas, as you can see. So that's the Himalayan range. And from the Himalayan range, we have the Brahmaputra and the Ganges coming out and then flowing through these lands and then flushing into the Bay of Bengal. And this brings in a lot of sediment, and over centuries, this sedimentation really created this delta, and it's a sort of a progression of this Ganges estuary that has created the land, which is Bangladesh. 2/3 of Bangladesh is delta, and we have 150 million people living in this delta. And so, this whole river system, this hydrological system of the Ganges system creates these sort of changing or courses of the river. And if you see this is a 20-year data collected from NASA, and it shows how the rivers are constantly changing, shifting its courses in different directions. And what you see is in between these sediments create these sand beds in the middle of the rivers. So it's a very dynamic system that starts from the Brahmaputra. When it enters into Bangladesh, becomes Jamuna, and then the Ganges, when it enters into Bangladesh, turns into a river called Podda, and the two meets and then creates this enormous flow, which really is the active part of the whole delta. And so if you see it much more closely, this is what you see. So this is during the monsoon season, when the heavy rain and the glacial melt is much more, and the current is much more in the waters. It erodes the banks. So riverbank erosion is a major issue in Bangladesh because the soft, fragile soil cannot withstand the amount of pressure that water brings down with it. So a lot of small towns, settlements have been washed away, and it happens till date. So these are some of the images that you can see. I found that image in Kazi's Bodda book, which I found really fascinating, that you see a mosque which is going into the river, but people are still praying in it. And then this is, all the images that shows how people have lost their land and home and, all these different things. And quite often these people get displaced because they become landless. Some people has the ability to buy land or get land somewhere else, and so they can move away and find a place to remake their home. But in most cases, people become landless, and these landless communities generally move to different locations, so they are basically displaced. And with this enormous amount of rain that we're getting nowadays, we just had a very major flood in Bangladesh. So with this flooding and also the amount of water that's coming down with rain and also from the glacial melt, this whole notion of displacement is becoming much more pronounced. So, I think this is an interesting research that we did, and I'll just show you very quickly a research which was about this movement of the river and how it became this pronounced situation. In 1776, you see that the rivers were quite different in its, so if you see here, I don't know if yeah, yes, it should work. Or maybe, I don't know. Can you see it? Okay, so yeah, so I'm just moving the cursor. So that was basically the Brahmaputra River. Oops, hold on. So that was the Brahmaputra River, and then that was the Ganges. Then we had this Assam earthquake. There were two major earthquakes that actually shifted the course of Brahmaputra and turned this into this larger river, which is Jamuna. And so this whole river system kind of changed because of this earthquake and became this enormous flow of water. And then as you saw that, the rivers are moving, but there are these sandbeds that gets created in the middle of the river. So this is one of the sandbeds, which is probably 3-4 years old. And so this is in the middle of the river. You see these desert-like, beaches that are formed. And so in our research, we went to these sandbeds to understand this whole geomorphological system that, keeps happening in these rivers. And what we found out is the ecology that actually happens. So basically, when these sandbeds form, which is in the lowest level, so the boatmen are the first ones to see that there is a sandbed that is forming. And then slowly the ecology starts to take shape. So there's mud skipper fish, there's sort of grass that starts to grow, and then the different kind of floras and faunas are coming in. Human move in the 4th year of its existence, because people watch whether this is going to be stable, whether it will stay or it will wash away. So after 4 years, you know that there is some stability to it. That's when people start moving in and then bring in their, all their in animals and domestic animals with them. So basically that. And then after 8 years of its existence, that's when government comes in and starts to, claim it as a sort of a land. And there are also other, very interesting phenomena which I will go later on. But so this between this 4th year and the 8th year, this 4 years is a good enough time for these landless people to move into these lands and find a place where they can build their houses and live there. So hilsa is one of our fishes that is very, very sought after by all the Bengalis around, not only in Bangladesh, but also in the part of India. So there's a whole politics that also goes on around this whole fish. But 3 years of fishing of hilsa actually makes this whole economy survive around these areas. So that's why people do not really move from this area. So if you go there and if you ask people, you have such a difficulty in living in these areas where you have to move like every few years, why are you still here? And they'll tell you because of this economy that's generated by the fishing. And so the research that we did actually was looking at this whole phenomena of movement. And this map that you see, this orange map, that is a pedestrian subdivision, or the CS map as it's called. This was done by the British East India Company when they came to Bengal, and it was a way of generating revenue for them. So this map, which is actually from, let's say, 200, 300 years ago, was actually a sandbed that was consolidated and known as Haim Chor. Chor in our language is actually a sandbed. We call sandbeds chor. So even the name suggests that it was a chor, like a sandbed. So the British, since this was not claimed by people, because these are just sandbeds in the middle of the river, they consolidated them as land, and it was documented. And then this was leased out to the local communities for farming. And that's how they started generating revenue. And so when the British left Indian subcontinent, they auctioned these land to the local people. And 200 years by that time, people's psyche had already accepted this as land, which is not really land. It's in the middle of the river. It's just a hydrological system. But if you see these documents, the blue one is actually the lease document that the British created. And then later on, the middle one is actually the document which was actually sold to the local Bangladeshis who bought them. And then now, after all these years, it's now handed down from one generation to the next generation. So if you see this map here, that's the map from, let's say, 300 years ago, the orange map, and superimposed on the current Google image, which shows that the land doesn't exist. So the land doesn't exist, but the paper exists. So then what happens is when these lands resurface, like if you see here on the plot number 1862, which shows actually the land was there and then slowly it vanished into the water and then it came back again, maybe a little bit of, you can see in 2019, it's slowly showing a glimmer of hope that it's coming back. So people wait with their papers. And then when the 8 years of its existence, that it shows that there is some sign of it being there, then they start to go and claim their land. And so, so that's kind of a very interesting thing that has happened. You know, when you have this notion of a dry culture imposed on a wet culture, which is ours, which is all about water. We have 700 or more rivers in Bangladesh and different kinds of water forms. So it's an absolutely wet culture in a way. And you impose a very dry idea on it. This is what happens. So that's basically a clash of culture. So in a way, when we were doing this research, we found that there are these housing systems that the people have created in Bangladesh, especially around these areas where these rivers are constantly moving. So they have a movable housing system. So these are mobile houses built by as a vernacular architecture, built by local people, where you have these wooden frame structures and their corrugated sheet as their facades. And so when there is a sign of land being washed away, they take their houses down, put them on a boat or a cart, and basically take it away. And you can buy these houses in markets. So, so these are the houses. So you can see that's a marketplace where there are certain modular sizes and you can, there are 2 stories, single story, you can add to them, you can, so there are different ways of doing it. They're quite beautiful structures actually. And, so it's almost a flat pack system, right? Even before this whole idea of a flat pack system came about, we already had it like 200, 300 years of its existence in the local vernacular. So basically this research that we did around land ownership and inheritance, we showcased that in Sharjah Architecture Triennial. So this is Sharjah, what you see around. And we were given a courtyard. So we bought 3 houses and we shipped it to Sharjah. So, a house can move from one location to another. It can move from one country to another country. So basically we took it there and we showcased our studies in the house. So you can see and it's beautiful houses actually, if you see. But these houses cost about between 4,000 to 6,000 US dollars, which is quite expensive for a local Bangladeshi who is living in the chores, let's say, in a landless communities. And that's how they generally live. You can see the grass is growing, and that's their housing. So basically they have these tin sheets that they bring with them, some bamboo, and they just make these makeshift houses where they actually live. So during this, that research was done in 2018-19, and then in 2019, the Sharjah Architecture Triennial where we showcased it. And then COVID hit in 2020. And so during COVID, we were all sitting at home thinking what went wrong. And we see what has gone wrong with our, over production and not being able to replenish what we have already exhausted from the earth, and this whole imbalance that's being created. And then the question is, how do you bring offer something to people who hasn't really done anything to deserve what this whole climate crisis and everything is created. And the people who are living in these chores are the victims actually, and who has absolutely zero carbon footprint. And they're the ones who are actually sort of suffering. So Bangladesh, as you know, is one of the countries which is facing the sea level rise. We have, enormous amount of, you can already see the changes in the biodiversity when you go to the coastal areas. The changes, especially the saltwater system entering into the sweetwater system. So a lot of changes are happening already. And so we are envisioning a large amount of displaced population. So during this COVID time, we kind of sat in the office and was thinking about what can be done, since these flat pack modular system of housing was more expensive for the people. We thought we could create something more affordable, which could be lightweight, which can be taken from one location to another, and could be built by, with very simple tools, and also only a few people could just bring it and build it. So we came up with a very simple sort of a space frame structure where we use bamboo as a main arm, and then we have these steel connectors that connect these bamboo arms together to create this structure. The idea was that we will have two levels, so if there's flooding, if the lower level floods, the upper level could give people a refuge or a place to stay. And in terms of, when there is movement in the water, and if they need to move the house, they could also take it and move it with them. So 2 stories, and then the other thing was, because of the space frame structure, it doesn't require a lot of foundation. It could have a very shallow foundation and can just sit on it very simply. So these were some of our illustrations that we came up with that could create a nice village, community where people can be together. And then if there is flooding, they could use the upper floor. This could also move from one location to another, maybe bring it to a city, so this displays community and mobility. And so the idea was, it could be an intervention into the vernacular system. So that's why we wanted the house not to look any different than what the vernacular houses look like, so that there is a cultural and an association in your psyche that this is a house and this is what the house looks like. So that was the idea, that not to move too far away from what the house form is in a human psyche in Bangladesh. And so it's just about creating a much large, stronger structure. And so this was our first house that we built in 2020, actually, when the pandemic was at its height. And this was a 8 feet by 8 feet modular house. We named it Khudi Bari. Khudi is small and Bari is a house. And so this house, once we made it, and we found out that this works, we had no structural engineer. So we just made it and to see whether it works or not. And at that time, no structural engineer was even interested in talking to us. Everybody was hiding. So it was just us, these 2 architects from the office, and we just built it. So when it worked and we saw that it's actually working, we decided to take this to the villages and the chores where we actually worked. And so if you see, that's the Google map where it shows where we actually went. So to go there, you need to take a boat from Dhaka, overnight boat, that takes you to the mainland. And from the mainland, then you take another boat like this one, and that takes you to these chores, which are in the middle of the rivers. And you can see the enormous scale of the water That's that. And so this is one of the chores where we work. So this is actually two chores, and if you see, the river line is actually there. That's the line of the river. Maybe it's better to show it. You see the boats? So that's the river. You cannot really see the bank of the other side. It's just the sandbeds that you see here. And these are like 4 years and older. That's why you see that it's already being cultivated. So we built a few with the local community. There are several houses. We built a toilet and we gave them a structural system where we have the structure and we have the roof. And then the idea was that they will redo the facade and everything. We also did these two or three modules together, so that if it's a bigger family, you can add several modules together, which would give them a bigger house, which you can see here. So it was absolutely built by the architects from the office, engineers, some of our, they're only our colleagues from the office. So this is like a 2-module house. So basically, we built about 100 houses altogether in different parts of Bangladesh. We secured a funding from the Swiss government, with which we were able to build. And we chose locations where we have flooding and we have this land movement, and we also have flash flooding because we have we share about 57 rivers with India, being a downstream country. The water sharing is not always equal. So quite often we get flash flooding when the dams, there are several dams, so when the dams open. And so many of these regions are actually affected by flash flooding. So this is one of those. So the facade material could be anything. It could be grass, like here, this is grass. This is tall grass that grows on the land. So people just take the grass and build with it. This house that you see, they use basically jute sticks to cover and turn it into a room. And so the lower level and the upper level, people just do however they want to use it. The way we work, since it was the idea that it has to be an intervention into the vernacular landscape, we do a lot of community engagement, and the community basically decides who will be the owner of the houses, because it's only 100 that we built. And so when we go to a place in a certain village, we offer like between 15 to 20 houses, not more than that, because we cannot build for everybody. It's just a sort of an idea that we want to share the knowledge of the construction. We want to give them an idea how this works, and if people find it accepted, and then only they can actually use it. So we have a brochure. The brochure actually talks about what the houses are, how this is built, and then they basically look into it. There are a lot of community engagements through which we do the mapping of the area. We also do wealth ranking of the people so that we know whom to give to the houses to. And then we also do model making workshops so they understand how the whole structural system actually works. And so through a whole process, we find, let's say, 15 to 20 families who will be the first owners of the houses. And so this is where, in a way, the sandbeds do not have any electricity, no running water, nothing. So you cannot always build them in the sandbed. So we make them in the mainland, cutting the bamboo and sort of drilling them and everything. Then we dismantle it, and then the dismantled elements then are taken to the sandbeds. And so that's how you can see that it's brought in to the sandbed, and then with a cart, it's taken to the locations. And generally, people make it themselves. So the team is there, they oversee it, but people make it because you have to transfer the knowledge of building it. Otherwise, you won't be able to take it with you when you have to move from one location to another. So that's how it's being built. And then once we finish the houses, we also have a certificate giving ceremony. And so it's a nice celebration also. So that also is an interesting time. So we've built these houses in different locations. This is, again, you can see this in the middle of the sandbed. You see these communities. And we've built so these houses have actually gone through 2 or 3 years of, in a full cycle of weather. And so we've gone through flooding, as you can see here. When the water receded, this is flooding situation. That image is quite striking for me because, you know, this was a very big storm in the shore areas, and you can see everything is kind of gone to the, you know, completely smashed, and nothing exists except for the house that we built, which was quite fascinating here. So, so in a way, the house survived, which was quite a fascinating thing for us. It won't survive a cyclone. I cannot guarantee against a cyclone, but thunderstorms it has been able to withstand. So that was great. So, you know, this is a very recent one where Vitra acquired one of our houses. So it's now, you know, sitting right next to a Renzo Piano high-tech house and a low-tech, sharing the same space, which is quite nice in a way. So we have these triptychs made by Orin Joyshen, which actually showcases, you know, how this whole event actually happens, how the water, you know, is taking away the houses and washing away, and then people are rebuilding it. The last one is actually about the refugee camp, and we've built several, nearly 8 projects in the Rohingya refugee camp. Bangladesh hosts about 100 million, 1 million, 1 million refugees, 1 million Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar. So before I go into that, I would like to also show you that we also, through our foundation, we have a foundation through which we do these houses. And through the foundation, we also do these kind of livelihood programs because you have to ensure economy. So even though it's not an architect's work, but it is a part of architecture, if you want to really realize projects, which is about building, you have to ensure people have the ability or the, you know, the finance to be able to build it. So we do a lot of these livelihood programs through which women are, you know, skilled to build things, make things, products, artisans. We have worked with women farmers. We've also worked with these. So these are basically zero investment projects. So these are just palm leaf and plastic, which are found in the, you know, specially used plastic. So they use that and then make these kind of products which are being sold in different places in Bangladesh. So this is the Rakhine state, as you see, the red dotted area. That's where the Rohingyas are from. And so they have fled to Bangladesh in different times. But the most recent was in 2017 when we had an exodus of refugees coming into Bangladesh in the orange area, Cox's Bazar. That's where they're being kept. So these areas that you see here, this used to be forest land. The forest was cut down to make space for the refugees to stay, and this is one of the, you know, densest refugee camps in the world. And the thing is, you know, this is an indefinite temporariness, which I find quite, you know, in most of the cases when you see these refugee housings or shelters, it's always about indefiniteness. There's a certain sense of hopelessness, a lot of trauma, a lot of things to deal with. And most interestingly, especially in Bangladesh case, we haven't given them the status of refugee. We call them forcefully displaced Myanmar nationals because, you know, when you give them the status of refugee, you become responsible for them. And Bangladesh government, with our enormous population, do not have the ability to host 1 million refugees. So they are looked after by the UN organizations mostly. And so they're not allowed to build anything permanent. So there's no permanent structures. There's material restrictions. You can only build with bamboo in this area and nothing else, except for the food shelters, which are by World Food Program or some other cases. Only the UN agency structures are allowed to use brick as a material, but otherwise everybody else has to use bamboo and tarpaulins and stuff. So that's the refugee camp map, as you can see here. My Yale studio actually visited the refugee camp and they did some work. So these are some of the student work by Dream Nasur and Nabil Haq, who did a multi-purpose disaster shelter where during the cyclone, students, all the refugees can go and stay. And so these are some of the student drawings that they did. Um, in my University of Toronto studio, one of the students actually worked on, how this whole refugee camp, instead of just, first is there is this emergency situation, but once this emergency time passes, then there is this indefiniteness of temporary indefiniteness. And so in those times, how can you really give people a livable, dignified way of living in a camp? So he tried to work on that, tried to create clusters and whatnot. So many of the studios are actually focusing on this transitional situation. So when we started working in the refugee camp, and as bamboo was the only material, and we thought this whole structural system of Kudibari could actually really work in this area, so we started working on it. So the first work was to actually build a house for ourselves. And that was a way of, also training the local communities how to build the Kudibari structure. So that's how we started working with them. And this is right outside the refugee camp. So as I said, that the refugee camp used to be forest land. So this forest land was cut to make these settlements for the refugees. Right outside the refugee camp, it's all forest still. So within that, we built a house for ourselves so that we could attend to the works that we've been doing with the refugees and a lot of community engagement. So we needed to be there quite often. And the closest city, Cox's Bazar, is about 1 hour's drive. So to commute every day, 1 hour back and forth, 2 hours, just didn't seem feasible. And also you have to go through a lot of restrictions, army and everything. So it was better to just, position ourselves there. So this is our house we built. This is a 3-module Kudibari. So we built it with 3 modules. And if you can see the structures actually, so the central module is actually a atrium space. And then we have the upper level is for sleeping at night. Lower level is where we work during the day. At night we sleep also. It can house about 12 people altogether. One side girls, one side boys. And then, so you can see these are, so the structural system you can see, we did it entirely with bamboo. So this was the first house that we actually built in that area to also, train the locals. This is our team. We have landscape architects, community architects, architects who are builders, engineers and carpenters. So that's the team altogether. And so the way the project started, it was about building community spaces for women. And so the first work was to work with the refugee community because we needed to find out what would be the program. There was a program from the UN organization, UNFPA and WFP, but at the same time, it was for us important to understand what the refugees actually wanted, what was their need. And so we had a lot of community engagements, talking to them, talking about their house, what it was like, what do they miss about their houses, and all of that. So one thing that came about from all these studies was that they missed their garden. And it was quite an interesting thing that living in this very, very dense situation, they don't have a space. Actually, they just missed that space. Where it could be a sense of refuge, a place where sort of can be by themselves, and so they made the models themselves, as you can see, quite beautiful models, and the only thing that come from that model is that beautiful garden that they have actually drawn, beautiful plants and everything. So we decided that we have to make that space happen. And the site was actually, these sites are very tiny sites, really small sites, so you cannot really leave out a lot of space because of the different programs that they have. You have to have session rooms, there are counseling rooms, there are rooms for midwives, so that women get good services from the UNFPA's team. And so the lower level is entirely these session rooms and all that different spaces. And these are 3 modules, as you can see, the 3 modules Kudibari, and then connected by a bridge on the top level. And the upper level is entirely for the women. And so the women, they actually have these shelters where 9 or 10 family members actually are cramped living in that space. So women really do not get enough sleep at night in many ways. They don't even get a proper, sort of, sort of relaxation in a way. So they come here only to sleep. At times they just come here and the top floor is only for sleeping. So yeah, that's their garden. It's now very nice and lush in a way. They're not allowed to plant any trees, like fruit trees or anything that takes long years, because trees are associated with home, and this is a transition. This is temporary, indefinite temporariness. So you're not allowed to plant any trees, but you can plant different kind of vegetables and gardens. So that's the building, as you can see from the refugee camp. Some of the spaces, it's quite open and airy. That's the top floor. Yeah, so they call it Shanti Khana. Shanti means peace, and Khana is a house, so it's a house of peace. So basically, they come here only to get some peace. So we've built about 8 different projects inside the camp, outside for the host community also, where we have designed aggregation centers, which is about women farmers bringing their fresh produce and selling that. I'm just showing one project here. So going more towards our city projects, which are my architectural office works, it's about responding to the climate, responding to the place in many ways, and my projects are all based in Bangladesh. Very little in the city of Dhaka, because it's a city of speculation, and I have from a very early on in my practice decided not to build for developers, so we haven't done much. So my works are more in the peripheries of the city. So yeah, so the Tropic of Cancer, as it goes through Bangladesh, it makes it a subtropical climate. If you see it in a larger scale, it's basically have 2 different climates. One is dry, one is wet. And within that, we have 6 seasons, so it's much more detailed and minute, but otherwise you have 6 months of dryness and 6 months of rain, which could be a heavy rain, could be a smaller rain, pre-monsoon, post-monsoon, and all that. But basically that. And in Bangladesh, I think this is a project that actually set in many ways, this whole idea about openness, this connection between inside and outside, designed by Mazhar al-Islam in 1953, the first modern building in Bangladesh. And so in a way, and that's also quite a beautiful image that we actually were introduced by Qazi in many ways to see how architecture is in Bangladesh. It's about this openness. It's about just having a roof over your head and a plinth to keep you above the water level, and just let the air flow happen. And that's it. So breathability and the flow of air is something that you need to ensure. And quite often in most of our projects from the very early on, that's what we've tried to ensure, that there is airflow. And airflows can be ensured by opening the facades or creating courtyards to make this deck effect so that there is a breathing and the air is drawn into the building and out. So low pressure and high pressure and all that. And so similarly, many of these projects where it's again 9 square grid, central atrium, and the atrium actually takes the air out as a stack effect. And so yeah, this is a very small project that we built from our office. This section shows how the center courtyard actually takes the air out. openness and everything. So, you see use of brick. Brick is our, as I like to say that it's our only material, because if we are a delta, we don't have stones or anything. We either build with mud when you have vernacular architecture. So architecture of people are made with mud, and architecture of power is made of brick in a way, because architecture of power seeks permanence, whereas architecture of people is evolving constantly. So that's much more about the softness and the impermanence and the changes through time. But everything, these are Buddhist monasteries, beautiful Buddhist monasteries that we have in our land, all made out of brick. And we have these temples, again, beautifully, intricately carved out with just earth and then baked into brick. And so you can see the Ramayanas and Mahabharata all being depicted on the facades, all made with the magic of earth in a way. So we have really good brick masons, and it's a tradition making with brick, as I see in Philadelphia also. You have so much of brick, so it really makes me feel at home. So this is the city of Dhaka. We have about 20 million people living here, a fastest growing city in the world, one of the densest also. We also have our pride, as you can see, a building that actually taught a lot about architecture than my school did in many ways. So this is something to be proud of, for sure. Several of our projects within the city is all about making space for people, because it's a 20 million people city. It's dense. The housing need is high. So this is our basic typical section that we build, stacks of floors. We don't have the luxury of making single family houses at all. We don't have that. Only the very rich and famous can have it, but otherwise regular section is this. So within that section, you try to create something interesting in terms of creating this airflow that I keep talking about, where you try to modulate the facade in a way that you bring in air through, and then so that it can really circulate through the building. And at the same time, it also creates a facade for the city, which is not about windows and balconies, but something to have a sort of a city facade, as I call it. So this is one of the buildings that we did. Similarly, against shade and shadow, trying to, even when you need to use glass to be able to protect it from the sun, so that it doesn't gain too much of heat, and doesn't make the building too hot. Because I feel like having a glass facade in a country like ours, where heat, especially during the summer months, is quite high, really takes a toll on the consumption of electricity, which is absolutely not necessary, especially when a country like ours do not produce electricity. We buy them from India and from other places. So it's a heavy pressure on the country's economy. Even though you're able to pay for it, somebody else is being deprived of that electricity. And quite often it's the farmers who are in the villages who do not get a continuous supply of electricity, because we have to artificially cool our buildings in the city because they're made out of glass. So I try to avoid those kind of issues. So try to make it as less electricity consumptive, or let's say, buildings on life support in many ways. So yeah, this is the city. You can see that the whole texture of it and the density of it. Only a very few green spaces remaining. One of our project, which is the Museum of Independence that we designed from my older practice in Urbana in 1997. We won this competition. And this was all about, again, in the city, the site was in the park, and we didn't want to create a building in a park. And so we went for a non-building approach, where it was basically a plaza, and the museum was taken below grade. So just very quickly going through this. So it's a the horizontality was maintained. And then you see the Museum of Independence, which is below grade, and the Tower of Independence right there. So that's the museum below grade. And you just take the ramp to go down. There is an audiovisual room, and then the central chamber, which actually draws in water into it. The inner spaces, I'll just go very fast because I think I've taken up too much time. So from here you enter into a space which is about drawing in the water. Bangladesh's independence has, it's been a struggle. It was about a 9-month-long war with the Pakistan army, with the freedom fighters of Bangladesh, and so it was a really genocidal, long 9-month-long war. And that started in 25th of March, 1971, and ended in 16th of December. And so, there is this duality of joy of being a sovereign country, but at the same time, with an enormous loss of life and struggle. So basically, it actually tries to bring these two dualities together. And so the Tower of Light, which we designed with glass stacked and with a space frame structure inside, the glass is basically stacked one top of the other, creating a sort of a panel which is then placed onto the structure. And you can see in a day which is sunny, you have this refractive light that comes through the building, to the medium of the glass. And then in the evening, we basically light it from outside, so you get this beautiful glow on the outsides. And very recently, we also already had this, 2 months long sort of a mass uprising to take away our 15-year rule of the government, which was quite fascist in many ways. So now we are going through an interim phase where we have an interim government going into election. So this was very recent, actually. We lost about 1,400 till now, 1,400 students. It was a mass movement by students, actually, that really triggered this whole event. And students, not just students, but also normal people were killed in this whole event in July and August, actually. So it's a country that's still going through a lot of struggles. I'll finish with a few very peripheral projects very quickly. One in the north, 2 in the south. This is the southern part of Dhaka, where we have a Mughal fort, which is the Lal Bagh Fort, and around it, this is the city, which is very, sort of grown without really planning in place in that sense. So, but that's the whole fabric of it. And within that, we built a community center, which you can see in brick. Very simple building with the services at the back, and then we have an atrium in the middle to allow the airflow to happen, and then we have the facades. The building has a very interesting story of this member of the parliament who came to our office and told us that it was an election time, so he told us, can you give us a design in 2 weeks' time? And so we gave him a design in 2 weeks. We never thought it will ever be implemented, so we gave him a view, like a 3D image of the building. So he won the election, he was happy, and then we forgot about it. And then all of a sudden we get a phone call that we've already done the foundation, we need more drawings. So it was like really a disastrous thing because we haven't had any idea what's going to happen. But anyway, it came out all right. So we were able to finish the building. And so we have a little ground in the front. There's this staircase that takes it up, and then, so that's the atrium, and then it takes out the air through the punctures, and so. Another very small project which is on the river, and I find this quite interesting but very difficult to talk about also because it's an in-between state. So these areas on the other side of the river is all about really factories and different kind of, mostly industrial areas. So we have a garment industry, we have other industries, and then this site, especially this entire site, belonged to the family actually, like this whole thing. And there is a river right on the river, and so this was a house that was an old house built in the 60s. And then later on, the family moved to the city of Dhaka. This land was kind of forgotten. Then they started making a cold storage building, which is this one. And then they built a garment factory building, which is the other one. So this became a residual space, which is in between these factories and garment industry and all that. And then when their father died, they basically turned this into a graveyard for him. So the grave is somewhere there. So all of a sudden, this whole small strip of land, which is connected to the river, changed this whole idea of becoming a very space which is about memory and sort of for the father, and then to create a sort of a memorial in a way. So they wanted us to create something in this in-between place. So the old house, which was sort of being dilapidated and was taken over by the river also, the foundation was not working well. So that's the old house down here. We had another small building which used to be a storage space. So we kind of tried to work in the landscape. This linearity, we broke the linearity by introducing a few pavilions in between. So these are the two pavilions from the roadside, a little courtyard in the middle with a little water fountain, and then basically cutting it to make these spaces. And then from this space, you can go into that old storage building, which sort of turned into a house. And in many ways, it always reminded me of Rosanna and Lyndon's projects, where they try to, do these adaptive reuse projects. So in many ways, these are also sort of insertions and bringing these spaces sort of and making it lively again. And also it works more like in this very sort of a polluted environment because of all that, a little bit of a space as a green. This is the old building, and then we made a plug-in to the old building, and that became also the foundation structurally. So it actually helps the building to sort of work together. We tried to keep the old structure and then sort of insert the new ones also. So yeah, I'm going to skip this video because I don't want to be too late. I want to finish it with two projects, which are the mosque projects. So the mosque, as you know, with the Bait Ur Rouf Mosque, which was a project commissioned by my grandmother, and in the northern part of Dhaka, it's a place which is sort of going through a transformation from agricultural land more towards a settlement, and it's already a settlement now. So that's my grandmother. That's the first prayer that happened when she actually announced that this land will be given as a donation to build a mosque. This area didn't have a mosque at that time. And so it's under a jackfruit tree. You can see my grandmother sitting there in white sari. And so it was in 2005, 2006, in September, when this whole groundbreaking ceremony happened. And in the same year, in December, she passed away. And so, in a way, it became sort of my promise to my grandmother that I will do this project for her. And so I became the architect for sure, but then also the builder, not building with my hand, but actually sort of overseeing the construction, fundraising, also to some extent becoming the client and working with the community. So, this project actually was about trying to understand what mosque is all about, how mosque came into being, what was the first mosque in Islam, because, as in our subcontinent, women don't go to mosques to pray. Especially when we were young, we never saw women going to mosques. So my association of going to a mosque to pray was non-existent. So basically, in a way, that gave me a sort of a freedom to rethink what it should be, instead of being taken over by preconception in many ways, or the symbols and all that. So I kind of questioned this whole notion of symbolic identity of a mosque, about representation of a dome and a minaret, whereas going back to the first mosque of Islam, where it did not have any of that, it was basically a home or a house form that was elongated and turned into a space for congregation. And this congregation was not just for prayer, for many other different reasons, which was social, economic, political, different reasons why people used to gather in a mosque. And now it's only about prayer and dome and minaret, which doesn't feel right. So if you see the mosque legacy in Islam, as it moved from the Arabian Peninsula to all different directions in East and West, you see all different kinds of forms actually, and they're basically adapting to the local culture, local construction system, the local climate, and all of that. So you see different range or different types of things that has sort of been created. And in our own landscape, these are the first mosques that we've seen in the 13th, 14th century during the Sultanate period when Islam came to Bengal. And this is actually, if you remember seeing the temples, so the same construction techniques were also employed in making the mosque. It's only you don't see those depiction of Rama and Mahabharata. In this case, it's much more about this geometric patterns and all. But it's the same construction technique that was employed. Maybe the dome was a new addition to that. But for me, it's always about the connection to whatever reason why we go to the mosque to pray, to internalize, to connect to the divine. So it's always about the spirituality, about a space and its quality of space. And so spirituality was my main, the direction that I wanted to take in the mosque. And this is also from Qazi's book, Bundunagar to Shirbangnagar, and where he basically shows all these different, this is the Buddhist monastery, a Hindu temple, a mosque, and our parliament building. All these different eras of architecture, and how this whole, the sets of things have developed. And in this case, where we had a site which was a 75 feet by 75. I'm so happy when I come to the US, I can talk about feet and inches. Anywhere else, I'm lost. So this is a 75 feet by 75 feet site, which has which is sort of aligned to the city grid in a way. And the mosque, as you know, especially the prayer hall, is always directed towards Mecca. So we call it Qibla. So the direction has to be aligned to the direction of Mecca. And for that, I had to shift the prayer hall 13 degrees to align with the direction of Mecca, and which created these corners. And so adding a circular volume really helped in that notion of movement. And so what it did also was creating these corners between the circle and the prayer hall. That became my open courtyard, which actually helps to create this stack effect of airflow, which I always try to address in my buildings. So, this was the first iteration where the conceptual drawing of that place. As I said, my grandmother left me the responsibility of building it. I had to raise funding. So she gave me some fund before she died, so with which I was able to do up to the foundation. Later on, I had to raise funds from different sources, from the community, from family, from different places. And so I was restricted in funding. It was 150,000 US dollars with which I was able to build this project. So you see that the entire outer periphery is all about brick. And the brick, and it's a load-bearing brick structure, because brick is cheaper The brick masons do not cost a lot, but the moment you go into concrete, it's much more costly because you have steel and you have cement, so it becomes much more costly with formwork and everything. So only the prayer hall was in concrete, and the rest of it was entirely wrapped in brick. So load-bearing brick structure. So that's the plan. This is where you enter into the building. That's the colonnade. And then you do not enter directly into the prayer hall. You basically bend, and the bend was intentional so that your mind gets slowly, sort of directed towards the act of praying, instead of entering into a building in a short direction where you're not ready. So those bends were intentional. And so then you enter into the prayer hall, basically, and then, so these are the different drawings, the sections. And so this is, as I was saying, the agricultural land turning into a settlement. Everything is getting built up all around it, and at one time, you won't be able to see the mosque anymore, so the facades do not really make much of a sense. That's why it was important also to make the building more internalized rather than, looking outward. And so that's the entrance pavilion. This little space will probably be the only public space remaining in this whole neighborhood once everything starts to grow. So that space is perhaps the only vibrant space in that area, even now. So that's the colonnade, the perforations that allows this breathing to happen in the building. Those are the open courts, which allows the airflow and also the nature to play its role. And so that's the, as I was talking about light, and, it's for free. I don't have to pay anything except a good, nice section to design. And that's it, basically. All you need is a good section. And then the rest is, taken care of by nature. So yeah, that's the one building. I'll finish with one last very quickly. This was after the Aga Khan Award. We had a nice lunch ceremony within the prayer hall. Now we also have weddings in that space, so it's also being used in different ways. So this is the last project, which is a small mosque, a very tiny mosque, which is in a very sort of a rural area. There was a building which was belonging to a family, kind of dilapidated. So that's a very nice drawing in a way. And that's the mosque, that's the house, which was bounded. And so if I go to the drawing, you see that's a house that was probably 300, 350 years old and belongs to a family who are, very influential in that area. The house was sort of dilapidated, and then one of our architects, who is a restoration, did the restoration conservation of that building and sort of redid the whole thing. So the family came together and pitched in fund to make that happen. And what happened? Probably my time is up.
It's back.
Okay. All right. So so basically that's the old house. And so once they restored it, are you good? Right? Am I doing something wrong? Okay, so, all right, I'm not touching anything. So basically, right outside that house, they already had a mosque, a small mosque that they had. So they wanted to redo the mosque to build another one to kind of bring the whole complex together. So we were brought in to design it. So that's the mosque that we designed. It's a very simple one-room building where you can see it's a load-bearing structure, all done in brick, no concrete in it at all. So basically a very pavilion-like, because it's in a open rural area. There's trees all around. So we created this space, which is where you can see that's the direction where the imam or the leader of the prayer is standing. And then it's all about openness and airflow. So that's the mosque, and this is the water body where generally they do their washing and then going into prayer. This is the main house, and that's the mosque outside. Simple building, not much happening, but this is the construction system where you can see how the whole the brickwork is happening. So at one level we had a tie, and then after that it kind of goes up. So that's the prayer hall, and it's just a roof held by these brickwork all around, and sort of open space, as you can see, very open to let the air in to the space. That's the imam's sort of alcove where he stands to do the sermons and the prayer, lead the prayer. Yeah, so I think I should finish it here. Thank you so much. Yeah, okay. Sure.
So we'll open up for.
Yeah, if you have any questions.
If anyone has any questions for our speaker, just raise your hand. I'll pass this mic right off to you. Thank you so much for just an exquisite lecture, some really gorgeous imagery. I'm sure someone's told you about the kind of history of this room and its
Oh, yeah.
implication with the con.
Yeah, I think he's somewhere around here.
Yeah, the ghost is a lot less than the last.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of appropriateness there, like of course Khan, known for monumental works in brick and a kind of extraordinarily reduced sort of Platonic vocabulary that resonates with yours. But there's this other side to Khan's formalism, which has to do with the space frame and this like wild, unrealized project for a tower in Philadelphia that uses the kind of diagram space frame against the stacking of the floor plate. And that space frame is uncannily like reminiscent of the structure for your temporary housing.
Oh, really? Yeah.
What's in a way more radical about yours than Khan's is he sort of showed the diagrid on the facade, and you're disguising it inside this like apparently very conventional house form, but you've also used the structure to kind of rotate the plan. There's the oblique of the cross members that are supporting the floor, and this oblique structure. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about the kind of marriage of an apparently kind of innocuous and well-known house form with like quite a radical interior structure, and how you sort of arrived at that structural unit.
Yeah, well, the structure, we were thinking that the structure, especially the way people build, we have this lateral wind load, right, because of the heavy thunderstorms that we get. And you need cross bracing. You need to cross, because if you have these four columns and then that's how they do it generally. They have these, they can buy these poles made out of concrete, and they buy them, they put it in the ground, and then they just build a house. And quite often when the wind comes, or even during the flooding season, when there's a lateral load from the water, it just, cannot hold because there is no cross bracing. So the idea was that you need a cross, but we wanted to reduce the number of elements to it. And so that's why we decided to bring it to the minimum of number of elements, so that you see these cross, instead of cross, it becomes a diagonal member, and then you have the roof on top. And the other thing was that you cannot do it in a way that it actually takes away space from the main. It's a tiny room, right? It's like a 10 feet by 10 feet room, or 12 feet. The maximum we've built is actually 18 feet by 18 feet, because that's the maximum length the bamboo can hold. But if you go for other members, probably we can go bigger, but for bamboo, that's the maximum we could have. So nowadays, the houses are basically 12 feet by 12 feet, let's say, is a room. And so basically trying to have that as clean as possible. So that's why you'll see that the members are on the sides. They never are in the middle. It doesn't come into your way when you're using a space. So, so that was our main intention. It was a very practical, rational way of thinking than anything else. And always the idea, and we've seen from a different times. I mean, even I remember as a young child, we've seen engineers trying out different ways of building with dome, building different kind of forms. introducing them to people as house, which never took off. They were just ended up being a pilot project here and there because there is no association of that being a home. So you cannot go too far from the vernacular. That's why we don't want to show the structure. It needs to be hidden. It needs to be sturdy and strong to withstand against these pressures of different kind of natural challenges. But at the same time, that form of a house needs to remain in its purity as people are used to. I think that was a very simple idea. I don't know. Yeah, thanks.
I'd like to ask you about also about the houses on shifting sand, and specifically about
Plinth, yeah.
maybe about its materials,
Yeah.
its construction, perhaps also its social meaning,
Mm-hmm.
and then lastly, what I take to be its permanence,
Mm-hmm.
because all that you said suggests it's not.
It is a permanence in a different way. It's a movable permanence.
Say more about that.
Well, you don't have land right? You are building on a land where you don't have the right to build, but you are somehow using this gap between fourth year and the eighth year to be there. You pay, and then they pay a small amount to the local government agencies to be there, and then cultivating of the land. So you can grow a lot of things in the sand. Actually, I had no idea, but they really do a good crop out of it. So that land is being used, but at the same time, the idea was that if you have to move, you can take your home with you, and so that's why you can actually take it down. And we also give them a small kit with a little bit of how to take it down, and so you all you do is take your bamboo, and if it is too much of flooding and you are unable to take everything with you, at least take the steel joints with you, which is easy to carry. It's not that difficult. But the thing is, bamboos are available all around Bangladesh. We grow enormous amount of bamboo, and it grows very fast also. And you need to cut bamboo to have a much bigger growth in a way. So that's why the material is not a problem. It's affordable. And so if you just take your steel connectors with you, that's the maximum you need. You can move to a different location, get some bamboo, and rebuild your house. And you can even, sort of turn this into a generational thing. You can move your steel connectors, give them from one generation to the next generation as they go on building this house. So there is a certain kind of permanence in a different way rather than being static.
But I'm trying to understand the plinth itself.
The plinth.
Because you
Yeah.
have point loads from the structure.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
saw in section
yeah,
that they're basically shallow piles.
yeah,
But it seems to me that the plinth,
yeah,
it's a space. I take it to be social because
Yeah.
sleeping is up.
sleeping up, and then if you cover it, then it becomes a private room. And if you open it, keep it open, then it's a social space. You can use it in any way you want. It could be your kitchen, it could be where you keep your animals, it could be anything. So it's up to the family how they want to use it. The plinth is generally a mud plinth because they cover it with mud. So the lower structural system is covered with a mud plinth. And if somebody wants, they can also make out of a brick plinth. They don't, especially in the chores where they move the houses, they don't build brick plinths because they know they have to move. So it's always a mud plinth. So, and the mud plinth is on a regular basis, they maintain it.
And one last question. Would cooking occur on the plinth?
Yeah, sure.
Would there be fire?
Yeah,
Something relatively permanent?
yeah, could happen, sure. We keep it open, absolutely up to the people. Even the facades are open to interpretation. A lot of people have used their own old salvaged corrugated sheet, and then I'm not really worried about what the building looks like, as long as they have a place to stay in a dignified way.
David, can I extend your question to the plinth.
Okay.
Because I think it's a beautiful question, which only David can bring up the idea of the plinth. But the plinth in Bengali landscape is also an existential space. It's not just a construction on purpose to raise it up, which it is during flood and all that, or for say water collection. It's this, and the term for the plinth is called beta. People use beta also for the house.
Yeah.
Beta in the house. The house.
The idea of the house.
Yeah, the idea of the house. The house may just vanish in a cyclone or tornado, but the beta remains. And the people come and look for the beta. So I think
Absolutely. Yeah.
beta is a beautiful idea on which the house rises. It's not just a pragmatic or practical thing. It's
Yeah.
a marker.
Thank you, Marina, for such a fantastic lecture. I was wondering about the emotional impact on you and your team to be working in these environments in which you have to deal with people that are living in conditions of flooding and living in conditions where they can't build with brick or plant trees, and how frustrating it is for you to exist in that context of kind of the inevitability of displacement and climate change, and if you're interested in, or do you think it's feasible to be working with a sense of permanence for these vulnerable communities?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's difficult because, you know, how do you ensure permanence when the land is not permanent? There are lots of impermanent aspects to this. It's a very different landscape to be able to understand it. And then, you know, how do you ensure land ownership? That's the main issue here. Those who have land, it could be, you know, as we talked about the vita or the plinth, it's about your permanence in a way, but you also have to ensure you have land ownership, that you have the land right, you have the right to build that vita or that plinth on which you build. People we are working with do not have that right. So they're basically moving, and so I don't have the capacity to give them land. As an architect, all I can give them is a system which can be used. And I'm not even saying that this has to be this has to last for 100 years or so. This is a solution that can help people when they move, and you've seen the way they generally live, right? So in a way, it's also about bringing dignity and the right to live in a better situation. That's how we see this project, actually. In terms of, so how we feel very privileged when we go to these kind of places, when we work with people. We're so much more privileged than, what they have in a way, but even at the same time, they're quite happy with, the way they live. You go to their house, they'll offer you tea, they'll offer you some sweets. That hospitality is there. There is a certain sense of pride also. They don't feel as victims, but we know that they are victims of a climate issue that's happening. They think of this phenomena of flooding. Flood has a very interesting thing in Bangladesh also. They see it also as it's at times a curse, but it's also a, sort of a blessing, because it renews the topsoil. It gives much more production out of the land that they have. So the farmers do endure a few weeks of difficulty because of flooding or movement, but at the same time, it also gives them better yield, let's say. So that's also something they see it as a blessing in many ways. So it's kind of difficult to understand this whole psyche. For me, it's always the sense that we are much more blessed with whatever we have, and we should do more.
I think a better word that I should have used would be mitigatory instead of permanent. Just in terms of the structural issues, do you think it's feasible to build
Sure. All depends on where we are, right? Yeah.
Hello.
I,
Thank you for sharing your work. I'm reading something into this work on the shores as kind of a flip of discourse. I think so often like climate change discourse is about loss, right? Loss of land, loss of shore,
Yeah.
loss of life. And there's something really fundamental in the landscape itself, right? That sedimentation is fundamentally a discourse of addition, which I think is a really different way of thinking about the effects of climate change. And your architecture responds to that, both in kind of like a philosophical way, but also in a very structural way. And I'm wondering if that the notion of addition rather than just loss is something that is also part of a culture of building, culture of architecture in the cities and in places that are not so visibly dictated by the landscape itself.
in the cities, when there is again land ownership and land rights, that dictates a lot of things, even in the cities. We have slums in the cities where people don't have land ownership, and at the same time, there also is the same idea of building with temporary materials. But then again, it's always these gray areas where you see these things happening. Yeah, and quite often the people who are losing their land or losing opportunity in the villages come to the city, and those are the places they occupy, the slums. And yeah, I mean it's the same situation, and it's the same impermanent, permanent. And there's this grayness of it that exists in a way. So there is also this thing in the city, but not in the speculative market. Where most of the houses are more expensive than anybody can actually own anymore, except for a certain section of people, let's say. And rest of the city is sort of, not having any opportunity in that sense. Yeah, we don't have any housing in that regard, social housing or low-income housing, nothing of that sort. So the slums are where people are generally living, and it's the same situation. Oh my goodness, there's so many questions. What have I done wrong?
People want
What have we done right?
Hi, thanks again for such an amazing talk. I have really two questions, but one is short and one is slightly longer. So for the shorter question, you mentioned that the original movable houses were very expensive, $4,000 to $6,000. How much were you able to get your houses retailed?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so the first one we built was $260. And then now, with the steel price going up and everything, our houses cost $450 with labor and transport. 4,000 to 6,000. No, 4 to 6,000, yeah. Yeah, and ours is $450 at the moment, yeah.
A slightly longer question. I am trained as an urban planner, so I've actually been thinking a lot about climate refugees and trauma and place guarding, peacekeeping, whatever you want to call it, within public space. And so knowing that public space is, maybe not exactly with your forte, but of course, I know that I often think, what are the characteristics of a healing public space for climate migrants or refugees? And you mentioned some amount of softness, some amount of the ability to change, but I'm curious if you have any other ideas or characteristics of what would create, again, that healing public space.
Yeah, a sense of refuge, whatever that means. Could be a house, could be a space, could be a shade, anything where, you can, this sense of healing. I think that's what's important, which especially in the refugee camps, where when people come to just sleep, it actually is a process of healing and nothing else. And if you can just provide that, even that's enough in many ways. And in many of our cities, we don't even have that. So I think, yeah, and in a way, I find the refugee camps are far more structured because UN looks after it. So there is a structure into it, even though there's 1 million people living in a dense situation. The slums are even worse, actually, because nobody looks after the slums. The people are making makeshift their own. They have the right to move around. They have the right to go anywhere. They can earn their own living. But, that's where they need much more, this space in a way. And in terms of refugee camps, there's a hopelessness, there's trauma, there's all these aspects, but and not a very dignified living situation either. But there's a lot of structured way of giving them spaces where they can at least be, have that space where they can gather. In slums, they don't have anything in that sense.
Great, thank you.
Last question? Okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have like two observations. The first is that I feel as a woman who designed a mosque, you really set a way of rethinking this space in our country, which was something different. And that makes me feel a lot of things, but mostly proud that you made a mark in a more dominated by male with your really different design and set of way of thinking. I think which is really being replicated in a lot of designs right now. So I think you really left a mark. And the second is more like a question. So I saw how you adapted the idea of Kudibari in a different landscape, which is the refugee camp. And it's interesting how you adapted this similar structure into different ways. Do you have any thoughts, like we were just talking about the slums in the city, do you have any thoughts on how, is there a possibility of adaptation of this structure or similar concept in the slums of a city?
Cities are difficult places, actually, where, I cannot just go and build anything in the city. In the villages, in the chores, it's easier. You don't need to take permission from the government. But in a city, you have build rules and guidelines. And as an architect, if I want to go and build something, definitely there has to. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's not possible, but it's a much more complex affair. It would be interesting if some sort of a financial model, or we could think of a managerial strategy through which even we could make the government policy could also help in that regard, to make the developers build low-income housing in conjunction with high income. So there could be there are in many cities there are all these different models that we can actually look into, but there is nothing of that sort. We could build something temporary. We are kind of working on a sort of a model. We'll see how it goes. It's about leasing a land for 10 years where there is no plan by a landowner to build something low cost, and then sort of the rent will slowly, over 10, 15 years, this rent can actually pay for the whole project in a way, which then the landowner can own as their own. So, there are different kind of models I'm working on. I wouldn't say that anything has happened yet, but we'll see how things go. I teach housing studio in Delft, so we are kind of working on different sort of models if there are any possibility. Kazi has done a lot of housing projects also, through Bait Ur Institute. So I think there are a lot of things that are being thought of, but I don't think we have come up with any strategy yet that we can claim works. Yeah, and the other thing I forgot to mention is that in the refugee camps, there's also a restriction on foundation, which Pudibari actually helps, only 2 feet foundation. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.